Welcome, everybody. I'm Craig Budner, and I'm the host of the podcast Client Conversations. And I am absolutely thrilled to welcome Jae Broderick to the show today. As you know, this podcast focuses on atomizing great leaders and their path to success, and kind of tricks and tips and how they overcame failure and fear and all sorts of things. And Jae is an embodiment of that. Born in Jamaica, came to the United States, is a writer, director, composer, actress, dancer, singer, tennis lover, and avid traveler hailing from St. Catherine in Jamaica. And she works around the voices of women and marginalized people, which I find so cool. But we were introduced because Jae reached out and we were talking about the concept of her book, which she published on deconstructing criticism, which I recommend to everyone. I listen to it. And Jae, I think you read it, right? I mean,
I do.
yeah, and it's so well read. It's like, it just, they're just certain books that when the author reads them. And I think what Jae will teach us today, among other things, we're going to hear a lot about her story, is about embracing the vulnerability that we get when we're out there kind of proverbially naked on the stage and somebody's firing criticism at us. And I think a lot of us deal with that in our professional lives. And Jae's a motivational speaker about these topics, but for somebody who has written musicals and done plays and been out there and put herself out there, I think I'm just excited to have this conversation. So Jae, welcome.
Welcome, and thank you for that brilliant introduction.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. I'm so looking forward to chatting with you more about this.
Well, your voice was in my head in Rome last week. I was in Rome on vacation. I had the best time, and I was walking around a beautiful, beautiful part of Rome. And the book hit me when you said, "What if our gods embraced their faults?" Do you remember that part of your book? Yeah,
I absolutely do. And what a thing to hear in Rome, surrounded by all of that Greek mythology, all that fabulous architecture.
Exactly. Well, Jae, talk a bit about, if you would start with kind of your background and upbringing in Jamaica. I mean, it's your journey is a fascinating one. I know that your early years were in Jamaica. Talk a little bit about what kind of gave you the courage that you had to go into a new country and kind of be an artist.
Wow. I wish I could, I wish I could say that was the plan.
Yeah.
Like most of us, you're always just constantly rolling with the punches and do what you have to do. I was born to two 19-year-olds. And while that could have worked out in a way that was not beneficial, my mother was the eldest and her four sisters were all teachers. So they put me in school. They put me in school not because they were like, we should put her in school, but because there was no one to babysit me. So at 3 years old, I was in the first grade, and they figured out that I was good at school, and I kept skipping grades to the point where when we migrated, my mother eventually married an American. I got to be in the seventh grade in America, and I was 10 years old. And so it was tough adjusting at that time to so many things. You're adjusting to the age difference. Everybody else is 13, you're not an adolescent. You don't have those hormones yet.
Yeah.
And the things that we were studying in school, I'd already done because the educational system is a little bit more challenging in Jamaica. But I persevered. And I think in terms of how to follow this life, no one ever told me that I couldn't. And when I started talking to other artist friends, I noted that they had different journeys. They had people giving them pushback, people saying it's not, this isn't a viable way to live. People saying like, you can't do that. People saying you need to have a fallback plan. No one ever said that to me. And for whatever reason, whether it was because I was headstrong or whether because they believed in me, but I feel like having that core of belief, wherever it comes from, is really helpful in whatever it is that you choose to do with your life.
Yeah, it seems like failure was not something you really contemplated. You were just doing your thing, you know?
Well, I mean, I think when you're young, you don't think in terms of failure. It's like you have to experience it first, and then you get a little scared, maybe. You're not as bold going forward. So, no plan.
And your transition into music and being a lyricist and musical theater, and talk a little bit about that.
Well, I was in Los Angeles being an actress, but always knew that writing was my strongest gift. And I knew that eventually I would turn to that. And I was in LA writing a screenplay like everyone else in LA, every writer, every waiter, everyone you run into was doing the same thing. And I'd written a short that was ideally to be played in front of a feature film. And a friend of mine, I showed it to her and she said, this sounds like the book to a musical. The short was based on my first love when I was 15. I didn't know what that was. And I'd been a dancer in musicals, but not a singer. It really wasn't my purview at all. But the idea took hold. And my roommate in Los Angeles at the time had just lost his father. And he and his father used to play piano together. And so he bought a piano as a means of reconnecting and kind of dealing with that loss. And so suddenly there was a piano in the house. And I started to play the things I heard in my head. I heard whole movements. I heard symphonies. I did not know that my brain could do that. And so in order to get those, I didn't have any music theories yet. In order to get that out of my head, I used Post-its. The black keys, A through whatever, the white keys, 1 through whatever, just all 88 keys. And that's how I got the music out of my head. And a friend called and I played it for her. And she was like, do you know how hard it is to do this? And I said, no. Because I did it. Because if I did know, I probably wouldn't have done it. Most of the things that we start from a place of passion, the passion drives you and the work comes later. Like the intense hard work of it becomes a surprise. So that's how I really got into musical theater. And my influences were, of course, things I grew up in Jamaica with, reggae, pantomimes, a different kind of musical theater, you could say, but also Bollywood. I used to watch, there was a station in St. Louis who used to play Bollywood every Saturday morning. And so I always watched that, and I watched MGM musicals. So, so what I considered my own personal canon was different from what most people who come up with musical theater know to be canon. But that turned out to work to my advantage because it shifted my mind in terms of what I thought was possible in terms of writing musicals.
It's such a beautiful story, and it dovetails so well with what we know to be the history of art, I think, where these groundbreaking artists don't mimic necessarily. They pick up on things from a collection of other influences, but they don't mimic. The mimickers are not the true artists. So it's wonderful in you bringing your own who you are and your own cocktail to your projects. I think it's just wonderful. I really hope to be able to see one of your plays or musicals one day.
Yes.
You say in Deconstructing Criticism, what if our gods embraced their faults? Right. What does that mean, and why is that an important concept for understanding how to take on criticism in a positive way?
Well, let's talk about like what we consider to be our gods today. Our gods today are politicians, they're celebrities, they're influencers, right? And everyone walks around with this very curated image of what we've all decided that success looks like. And everyone is in pursuit of that. We say on social media, nobody posts their losses. Everything is just this technicolor dream of look how great my life is. And it is because we're all chasing that ideal. But the people who most embody that ideal are not allowed to show their flaws. Their success depends on them appearing flawless or without fault. But honestly, if they accepted and were honest about their faults, it would give the rest of us permission to. Because the truth is that your real strength is not in appearing to be this idealized version of yourself, but it's in embracing your vulnerability. And if we could embrace our vulnerability as strength, we would all be better for it.
I cannot remember the name, but I know there's Japanese art that is around glassware. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yes, they have the idea that things aren't really broken.
Yeah.
You fill it back in with gold. Yes, I've heard of that.
Yeah. And the concept is that the real valuable pieces are the ones that have been broken, repaired, and they come with their flaws. I mean, as you know, I just got back from Rome and I walk around, and these emperors built these great temples to their own godliness and tried to attach what they consider to be gods to their image. And I think, unfortunately, we've had thousands of years of history of seeing gods not embrace their faults and be vulnerable, which is unfortunate. But I definitely see how that can lead to being able to accept criticism, because if people you put on a pedestal can talk about their vulnerability, then we can as well. And boy, thinking about our suicide rates of young kids, how that could be helpful. So that's beautiful. So in deconstructing criticism, you talk about the concept of separating you, the person, from you, the artist or the lawyer or whatever profession somebody's in. Talk a little bit about why that's important to taking on criticism.
It's important, I think, because we internalize feedback almost automatically, right? Whether we intend to do or not. And unlearning that takes work. And it's not something that's achieved overnight. It's almost reflexive. But you are not your work. Your work is something that you do. The work is something that you work at. You are not your failures. And the thing is, we need to separate ourselves from our work, because if you internalize the criticism for your work as criticism of yourself, we cannot do our best work when we are feeling small. And that is what criticism does. When we tell ourselves the story that this is a criticism of me, a person, and not of product. Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. And it feeds into, for some of us, our inner critic, our
Absolutely.
We were disciplined in a certain way or told by peers in a bullying fashion that we were less than. And that kind of holds us back.
Absolutely.
It's great. So one of the wonderful things that you write about in your book, which I recommend to folks to listen to, because your book reminded me of Bono's Surrender, because it's the only two books I've listened to where you can hear that you're a lyricist, the way you read it and the way you turn a phrase. It's almost a poetry. But you talk about Anansi the spider, which is a Jamaican cultural lore that comes from Africa. And I would love for you to talk a little bit about that, and why do you talk about that in connection with criticism and understanding how to use it as a gift?
Absolutely. So Anansi, the stories of Anansi originated in West Africa and made their way to Jamaica via the transatlantic slave trade. So the concept of Anansi is this tiny spider, mischievous but smart, right? It's a tiny spider that's always outwitting things that are bigger than him, things that seem smarter than him, and situations that seem unsolvable. And so in the book, the way I relate this to deconstructing criticism is when Anansi is faced with a problem, whatever the problem is, the first and most important thing that Nancy does is believes that there is a solution. No matter what the obstacle, Nancy is going to figure this out because Nancy believes it can be figured out. And one of the things that I end that chapter with is how strong a thing is belief. How strong a thing is belief, because it goes back to your inner critic. In the book, I say the inner critic is in charge of the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves. It is our beliefs. And our beliefs can either open up the world or shut it down. Whatever we believe is how we're going to behave. And Nancy's a great example of believing in the best possible outcomes every single time.
Yeah, it's bravery. It's the bravery to combat things and think of them as not insurmountable.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's wonderful. I'd never heard of the story before. It's such a beautiful story to tell kids because kids can get frustrated because they don't have all the tools to solve every problem, and it it causes you to open up your mind. No wonder you put Post-it notes on a piano to figure out how to get that music out of your head. It's awesome. Kill your darlings. What does that mean?
That's actually a very popular term in creative circles. Sometimes, say you're working on a project and you come up with an idea and it's just like you fixate on it. You're like, I'm brilliant. This was great. Then the project grows and expands, and the idea no longer fits with the progress of what the project has become. But your instinct, because you remember the feeling of this, like, oh, this is brilliant. Your instinct is to hold on to it, but it actually ends up holding you back. It's you getting in the way of your own progress because you're in love with an idea that doesn't fit your current reality. So when you come to those points, I say, kill your darlings.
Yeah.
You can repurpose them later, but they're holding you back.
It's so interesting. I was listening. I love the Farnham Street podcast with Shane Parrish, and I haven't finished the whole podcast, but there's a business executive who's talking about relationships, interestingly enough. So he's a successful entrepreneur talking about relationships, which I love. Again, back to vulnerability, back to the concept of what if the gods admitted their faults? So he's talking about his failings in relationships. And I've experienced this. I've been married happily for 32 years. And my wife and I joke, we've been happy for at least 30 of those. And I think some of it is we're masters of our universe, and we think our proverbial, what doesn't stink. And so we come home with our significant others and we bring this concept of you should genuflect to me because I have people at work who think I'm really special and all that. And it's interesting. The kill your darlings concept doesn't just really apply to the creative world. It applies to everything. And it's deconstructing not just criticism, it's deconstructing how we got to where we are. And we kind of forget that we stand on the shoulders of all these great people. My mother was my hero, and she passed away way too long ago. But she hated giving speeches, but she'd done all this wonderful work in the community. So she'd get awards and she'd have to give a speech. And she'd always say, it's a Mark Twain quote, if you see a turtle on a fence post, she had a lot of help getting there.
Oh, that's brilliant.
And it's easier to kill your darlings when you realize that you had to get a lot of help along the way, even with people you didn't like and thought they were mean. And so I want to turn your attention to the world of law, which I know you were legal secretary, so you've seen it. You've seen what lawyers go through. And I think lawyers, their brains stay so in their head on certain things, some of us, where criticism becomes all they can focus on. It's the problem spotting that we learn to do as a part of being a lawyer. So how do you tell a lawyer when they get back a memo from a partner and it's all red, or they get criticism from a judge or a client, or they lose a trial, or their transaction gets to the end, it doesn't close? Like, how do they look past the failure to see the gift in the experience? What would you tell them?
Actually, the first thing that I always lead with, and I say this when I give talks as well, is like, the failure is the point.
Yeah.
You don't learn by succeeding all the time, right? But there's no denying that pouring your all into a process and coming to the end and not getting the desired result is disappointing. And that's when I think that you have to turn to your community. The first thing is you have to separate yourself from the results.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so the partner has given you back a document with all kinds of red marks. Take a second. Just take a second and then read it. Is it true? Did you miss something? Were you just so hyper-focused on what you thought the solution was that you missed something that was obvious? Are they coming at you from just a different form of thinking? I think if you can get out of your own way first, you stand a better chance of getting to the truth of what's going on in the situation and not just have it be about your own failure.
Yeah, it's the curious mind, right? It's what are they trying to accomplish?
Right.
That maybe you missed. And you do talk a little bit about sometimes the criticism, once you flesh out those issues, sometimes the criticism, you kind of have to throw it away once you've exhausted the analysis of what it's about. Talk a bit about when you kind of sometimes just have to ignore it.
Right. One of the things that I say is, you don't have to take every piece of criticism, honestly. And of course, you have to adjust for your boss or being in a law firm or, dealing with your client or whatnot. But everyone who gives you criticism is coming from their own point of view. And there is very seldom one right way to do things. So a lot of times, once you've parsed through all the criticism that you've been given, a lot of times you're like, well, no, I feel that I was correct. I feel like what I did was right. And you can be right in that. Every criticism is not always correct. That's the thing, and we can't, in the same way we can't accept all praise as gospel, all criticism isn't gospel either. But it does take separating yourself and your ego and being able to look at the product objectively for you to get to that place of discernment.
Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes you just have to do, what the boss says or what the client says, or,
right.
It doesn't mean you have to carry that with you as your Bible going forward.
Right.
I think that's exactly right. So how, you come from this background where you were, you were enveloped, it sounds like, with love, your aunts, all teachers, and you were kind of pushed forward in a very caring environment where, it's some could say, well, that it's easy for her. She was so gifted and loved. And what about the people that didn't get that? Like some people don't have that thick skin because they weren't told they were special. What do you tell them? Like, are there tricks to develop that thicker skin and to be able to be the observer on the criticism?
Well, I think that whenever we're observing other people's lives, it's the story that you tell about their lives is very different from the story that they tell about their own lives. And so our perception, colors our opinions, right? For me, I've certainly had moments that I've been like, oh, I would be so much further along if my parents had been married. What if they had already, graduated college when they had me. What if, what if, what if, what if, what if? But what I presented you was the incredible joy and the positives that had come out of my situation, which could have been much different. And I've chosen to focus on that. I'm from a little town called Old Harbor, Jamaica. And sometimes I go back there. When I go back there, I do look around and say, why me? Why me? And I think that's a question a lot of people ask themselves. And when you start asking the why me's, make sure you're asking it for both sides of the coin, because for everything that you perceive as a deficit, someone wishes they were in your shoes. Why me, but also why me? Yeah.
Right. No, it's the concept of finding your gratitude for all things. Sometimes, what's the expression? Which part of the knife are you going to grab? Are you going to grab the sharp part, or are you going to grab the handle? And it's a lot easier to narrate our experiences, even when they're challenging, as ones that gave us something, gave us strength, and don't. I mean, if they were truly bad experiences, they don't necessarily need to reside in our head as negatives. They can reside in our head as positives. It's really great. I love, so a little bit of disclosure you would not know. You quote, I think it's the last part of your book, Teddy Roosevelt, The Man in the Arena.
Yes.
It is my favorite. My dad was a banker and loved being a banker, and then the companies, Texas banks, kind of went under, and so he continued a little bit, but his passion became Teddy Roosevelt, and he amassed what we were told was the largest private collection of Teddy Roosevelt books and paraphernalia, keepsakes, the whole deal. Like we've got, and he gave it all to SMU, which there's a poster in the back there in the background of Teddy Roosevelt. So I love Teddy Roosevelt. Grew up with a fond appreciation looking at all these. My dad had collected all these original photographs when he went out to the West and in what we now consider Yellowstone National Park and all these wonderful places. Why that particular quote? Why did it resonate with you? And why was it a good way to end the Deconstructing Criticism book?
The Man in the Arena. Oh, goodness. I would be so impressive if I could recite it for you right now.
Would be. I can't either. Great, yeah.
But the gist of it's not the critics. It's not the critic who counts. It's the one who's actually out there putting in the work day in, day out. When we talk in terms of deconstructing criticism, when I go and I talk to various groups, a question that I get a lot of the times is, do you have any advice for giving criticism? And I said, that's not, I might give little tidbits here and there, but that's not really where my bent is. My bent is in the idea that criticism is going to come at you either way. It is something that exists in the world. So I'm trying to equip you with tools for deciphering it when it comes your way. As for the quote, I want it to be the kind of punctuation to everything else that I've been talking about the entire book. Because creating something from nothing is a noble pursuit. There is an intimacy to the work that you do when you are creating something, when you're discovering. That is all part of the human experience. And I'm asking that you please not always focus on the result and kind of live in the joy of of the discovery of what you're doing from moment to moment, because there will always be a critic.
Yeah.
But you need courage to create. And it doesn't take very much courage to criticize at all.
Yeah, and it's the most, what you say, and we discussed a little bit earlier, the critic that can be the most powerful and debilitating is the one in our own head. You
Yep.
know,
You,
we
you,
yeah, but we think we are the voice that is talking to us, and if we don't control that narrative, I mean, Eckhart Tolle, Marcus Aurelius, an emperor that
Mhm.
was vulnerable, right? A Roman
Yeah,
emperor that actually was an example of somebody who celebrated his faults. And we learn from today, right? His book Meditations is read like a Bible by some people, because he was so rare in celebrating his faults, but he didn't tell himself he was bad because he did bad things or he served emperors that were bad. He told himself he was good and he just needed to get out there and focus on the
right.
task at hand. I love your message, and I love that it ends that way because sometimes we all get stuck. Like the moment you discussed at the beginning of your book, where you want to climb into a hole,
Yeah,
you know, you just have to go move on. Yeah,
I do.
you feel like crap right in that moment, but you just got to keep moving on. So, a couple more questions for you. One is your project Maestra. Can you talk a little bit about that? It's so wonderful. I have a trans child. My youngest is,
Oh, wonderful.
and I know that you work with non-binary kids and young adults, and talk a little bit about that.
Well, Maestra is the organization that actually gave me the platform to do the workshop that is deconstructing criticism. I don't work with them specifically, except in that construct, but they support women and non binary people in the musical theater industry. And they do such wonderful things, such as even like having music directors who know how to modulate for those voices that are always going through some changes, just so specific. So it's a very thoughtful practice, and they're doing great work over there.
Yeah. And I mean, talk a little bit for those who aren't exposed to the world of non-binary or trans. Talk a little bit about you know, what are the challenges of being trans in our world, in the art world, in any world? Like what would, if you were coaching somebody who was trans, what would you tell them?
Actually, this is not something I feel I can speak about with. I think it would be better to speak to a trans person.
Yeah.
I don't want to. I don't want to speak for them, and I think it's important to be aware of that. Like I could, do a bunch of facts and figures, but it would be great for you to have a trans person on the
Yeah.
podcast, and they can speak about like their particular struggles and like they're things that I've experienced from trans men talking about what it's like to move from being a woman to a trans man, that they get listened to more
Mm,
and that they're lonelier.
interesting.
Yes, so that would be a fantastic guest
Yeah.
for you to have on, because it's like we need all of these perspectives so we can understand each other better.
I've had a trans woman on who came out at 63.
Mm,
Cami Richardson, who's a fantastic person and a dear friend. And we did talk about some of those issues, but I find it really interesting the observation that some trans men have had, that
hmm
they become more lonely, but they're listened to more. It is, it's, look, we can deconstruct all sorts of things. And I think um, criticism is deeply personal to us,
hmm
not always personal to the person giving the criticism. And then
Right.
deconstructing where we are as a society and how we got there. And I mean, that's an endeavor all of us are kind of on. I know it scares some people because it's different, right? Uh, it's not what they grew up with sometimes.
Right.
I've certainly, as a parent of a non-binary child, I've had to think about the world a little differently and learn,
Right.
which is that same curiosity that you're asking people to embrace when they're getting feedback, which I think is why your message is so powerful in so many different ways. Um, you worked under President Obama. You set up events, politics aside. I mean, obviously, a human being that has greatly changed our world, broke a number of barriers. Talk about what it was like to work in that administration and what you kind of learned from that as you take it into your life.
Oh my goodness. It's an experience that I will never forget or regret. I actually put art making aside for close to 8 years so I could watch history unfold in front of my eyes. It was the most extraordinary experience to travel not only um, United States, but overseas, and to see how the president and first lady were received and how you could see change being made in real time. And, seeing the fallout, like what's happened since then, it's, um, it's sad, but it gives us more room to dream, doesn't it? It's several steps forward and some steps back, but it was incredible because they're extraordinary people. They're exactly who they appear to be when you see them on television. They have a core of integrity. It was not easy day in and day out for them to go out and be not only themselves and not only run the country and be the partner, someone who runs the country, but be a representative, willingly or unwillingly, for millions of people. So it was tremendous.
Yeah, I can imagine it was. And it is so important how the United States projects itself. And when you not only bear the burden of projecting yourself as the first family of the United States, but the first Black family to lead the United States, a lot of youth at the beginning of his presidency as well. I can imagine the pressure. Was there a moment that you could say you observed the president of the United States or the first lady take on criticism that, I mean, of course they got it from all corners,
Yeah.
still to this day do, and took it on and improved themselves? Did you see some of that as an example to what your work is?
Well, I think I can say with some certainty that they both had a tremendous sense of purpose. They understood their position in the world and their position in history. But just as people, I feel that they had a support system. Right, Mrs. Obama's mother, who recently passed away, lived in the White House with them. And so they were able to keep that sense of home, even when they were surrounded by all these other things. But I think the example that I would take from them in terms of deconstructing criticism is that no matter what was going on with them, they always gave you 100%. They always did what was required. And it's such a great example of perseverance. We don't know the conversations that they had with each other. We don't know the struggles that were kept to just a small circle, but we all have those struggles, don't we? We have those struggles. So I just thank them for being able to be out there and be great examples for us and showing us their vulnerability, which they did.
Yeah, well said. Well said, and a great way to end it. I mean, Jae, you're such a gift. I always say that my job in life is to figure out what my gifts are and share them with people. And we're so fortunate that you do that and kind of have the broad sense to understand that your gifts apply in so many different ways. You know, you're working on musical theater, you're working on plays, you're writing novel, you're writing a book to help others understand how they can, you know, be curious and learn from the gifts that life throws our way. And I just thank you so much for sharing your insights. I look forward to hopefully even doing something live, maybe with our associates at some point or other lawyers, because anyone can benefit from your insights. And I also look forward to you doing some musical theater that involves in some way Nancy, because I think that's such a great cultural story. It's those are the kinds of stories that need to be told. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And I look forward to meeting you in person because we haven't met in person.
Absolutely. And if I could say one thing, thank you
Yes.
for the kind words you just said about me. But in fairness, I think you're doing the same thing. I
Thank
think
you.
getting all these people together and sharing their points of view is we're essentially trying to do the same thing. And let's continue to do that.
Amen. Thank you.